And then will you be posting this on the online website? Random?
Yes.
Great.
Elaine, you can go ahead and start anytime now.
All right, I'm very happy to see all of you today. I'm Elaine Johnson. I'm the Program Vice President for the online branch. And of course, we have Randa Blanding, who's our webmaster, and Toby Baum is going to also be facilitating today. We have a couple of things that are ground rules, so to speak. We're going to put our questions in the chat. So as you think of questions, you may have some already, but even if you have, as they come up, please enter them in the chat so that we can combine questions and make it a real good discussion after our presentation. The other thing is that during our presentation, would you please mute yourself and also turn off your video, because at that point we'll have better bandwidth for our speaker. So that will be terrific. And of course, we're delighted to have Aileen Rizo with us, who's an expert on equity and has a good story to tell to us. A long, hard row, so to speak, of working on this. And we're just so happy to have you here today. So with that brief beginning, I'm going to ask Toby Balma, who has extensive leadership experience at the national, regional, local level, and she will, and Toby, I'll let you continue with this welcome and introduction.
Thank you, Elaine. It is both a pleasure and an honor to welcome and introduce Aileen Rizo. For our guests, AAUW's mission is to advance gender equity for women and girls through research, education, and advocacy. This includes pay equity. While many of you are aware that AAUW, through its AAUW Fund, provided $6 million in 2023 for grants, projects, and fellowships to women, AAUW also has a legal advocacy fund. In the past, I was on the national LAF fund. LAF supports brave litigants seeking legal redress for equal pay. Title IX, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and tenure denial violations. It allocates $100,000 annually to help fund landmark cases like Aileen's fight for pay equity. These cases take a long time to litigate, and they also take an emotional toll on the litigants. Aileen Rizo was born in Phoenix, Arizona, and embraces both her Native American and Mexican heritage. As the first in her family to finish college, she has since earned dual master's degrees in educational technology and mathematics education. She has spent 28 years working in mathematics education at all levels to close the academic achievement gaps, empowering communities to disrupt math anxiety, and promoting groups underrepresented in STEM fields. In 2012, Aileen began her fight for pay equity. 2012. In doing so, she became an advocate for the economic security of women in California and throughout the country, working with legislators and advocates to pass some of the strongest pay equity bills in the nation. She has been a passionate voice for equity, inclusiveness, and promoting diversity in education. Currently, she works as the Associate Director of the Ames Center for Math and Sciences as a graduate math science education adjunct professor and is also pursuing a PhD in STEM education. So again, it's my honor and privilege to welcome Aileen Rizo.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you so much for this opportunity. Before I get started and share my screen, I just want to say that I'm indebted to all of those who walked beside me during the 8 years of litigation. Case law is very strong, but it does take a long time. And there are some people in this world who walk the walk and talk the talk. And AAUW's LAF Fund and the people that came around me through that were such a treasure and so priceless. And one of those has been Toby. And Toby has not only walked that walk with me, but has continued to check in on me, continue to be a true person in my community. And I am just so grateful. So I just wanted to thank her and thank AAUW and those represented here who are committed to the values that we share in this organization. So with that said, I wanted to share my story, but I wanted to also remember that the progress and the change that we want made does not happen alone. And you know, my name is next to the case law that's there for this case, and is next to the you know, some of the things that will go in history maybe or be read about. But the reality is that it didn't happen just because I did it by myself. It really happened by women who and advocates who laid the groundwork, and every step of the way opening the door a little bit wider for there to be equity and for there to be equal pay. So I named my talk The Progress Made by Good Trouble. That was coined by our former Representative John Lewis. I love that phrase because in just reflecting on history and in my own walk through this whole experience, the people who trailblaze, the people who advance progress and equity and social justice, they're not usually very welcomed in those spaces. And the reality is that they are troublemakers. And it is only when history looks back and advocates look back, we realize that their troublemaking was so good and so needed and so helpful. So I just love his story because he talks about how when he was little and he went to the movies and he asked when he came back from the movies why he had to sit at a certain place and other people could sit at other places. And so just those questions that he asked really started forming who he became. And he was another person who lived the values that he believed in, and he sacrificed his own body. I mean, he was physically hurt in some of the protests that he attended, and he was arrested. So I just want to give him credit for that phrase, and hope that we all kind of are ready to get in some good trouble. So I want to elevate other women's stories and not just my own. And I want to start with a woman named Aileen Black. She was born in 1906 and she earned a Master's of Science degree. She became a chemistry teacher, a high school chemistry teacher. And during her time, she realized that she was not getting paid equally. And at that time, a white male school janitor was making more than she was. So she petitioned in 1938 that the school would give her an equal salary based on other high school teachers that were teaching, based on her experience, based on her qualifications, rather than her race. And the board refused. they said that she had already signed her contract, so she'd already agreed to that pay, so it was too late for her. Well, with the backing of the Teachers Association, the cooperation of the NAACP, she filed a lawsuit in March 1939. And it marked her as the first teacher to file a salary discrimination suit in the state of Virginia. So she was accompanied by a team of attorneys, and one of them was Thurgood Marshall. And her case actually was dismissed. She appealed to the Supreme Court, but when the process, which is very long, in that process, the board retaliated against her and they fired her. And so the court said, well, you're not an employee anymore, so then you don't have a case. So it stopped. Another case after her went forward all the way to the Supreme Court and won. And when the other case that didn't involve her won, she was reinstated into her job in 1941. Aileen's Black story that happened in the 1900s is kind of what people believe happened now, but they don't realize that it's still happening. And the stories that repeat itself don't need to repeat itself, but they do. So Aileen Black, maybe we haven't heard of her, and her case was lost, but the progress that she made, I do believe, allowed the next case to win. So here's another example on a woman that we probably all recognize now. Lily Ledbetter, and her story has been repeated because it was so inspiring for her to stand up for herself, to face Goodyear. You know, she had worked for Goodyear for 19 years, and someone anonymously put a note in her locker and told her that she was being paid less than the men in her same position. So she filed a suit, and she actually won at every level of the court. When I hear that, I can understand that. I started in every level of the court. I didn't always win. And so I wondered what it would be like to just win at every level and then get to the Supreme Court. When she got to the Supreme Court, her previous victories were overturned. And the court decided that there's this kind of window of 180 days that you have after a discrimination event happens to you. You have 180 days to file your complaint. Well, of course, Lily Ledbetter didn't know she was being paid less, and that's still happening. And so due to this technicality, she didn't have a case, and she never recovered a cent of her lost wages. And thousands of dollars were spent in legal fees. Well, her story doesn't end there because, like I said before, progress isn't made just by one person. Justice Ginsburg was on that U.S. Supreme Court decision. She was on that ability to vote, and she dissented. And her dissents are famous, right? We love her for the way that she spoke up. I love the story of her telling how she logically strategized going up before, when she was a lawyer, before she became a Supreme Court justice, going up and thinking about how she was going to present her cases. And she was so selective in the cases that she presented because she really wanted to make progress for equity and equality for women. And she said, I think about those justices in front of me as a lawyer, that they're kind of like kindergarteners. I have to teach them what it means to be a woman and to not have equality because they have no idea. So she wrote a dissent for Lily Ledbetter's case, and these are her words. She said, the court does not comprehend or is indifferent to the insidious way in which women can be victims of pay discrimination. And she called upon Congress to act where the court had not, where the court had failed, she said. Well, in 2009, President Obama signed the Lilly Ledbetter Act. And he used the perspective of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And it said that this is was her perspective, her suggestion was that every time a woman got a paycheck, the event of discrimination happened again. So that it allowed that clock of 180 days not to expire. So it wasn't really based on that first event. It was restarted every time. So with that in mind, if a woman didn't know she was getting paid less, she wasn't held accountable for her first paycheck where she wasn't getting less. She can still have an open window when she finds out. Well, the year that Aileen Black passed away is actually the year I was born. And you'd think a lot more progress would have happened. I mean, we had the Equal Pay Act, but there was so many loopholes there. When I found out about Aileen Black's story, I really reflected on so much of the commonalities that we share, because I studied in the STEM fields too. And if you study in those fields, it's becoming more diverse and more open. But in history and in my time as well, there's very few girls in Calculus 2 classes. And there wasn't any Latinas in the class. So you didn't always see yourself in those spaces as belonging. So, you know, when we think about underrepresentation in STEM fields, it's so important that young girls can see who they can be. And that's one of the reasons that this whole process and experience in my life really changed who I was, because I knew what I had gone through, but I never really embraced the fact that I was changing things simply by being in those fields. So 75 years after Aileen's Black case, I filed my own discrimination case. And I was the only full-time woman in the math department at the Fresno County Office of Education. I was a math consultant whose the majority of my job was to work with elementary teachers, but I worked with all teachers to help them to increase their knowledge of math content, to be their math coach, to be their mentor, just any contracts that came where it was sort of math education related. I could be assigned those and I would go out, especially to the rural schools. So Fresno based, that means I was going out to Mendota, to Firebaugh, to Kerman, trying to give them support in math education. So I was in my 4th year at the county office, and it was at a business meeting. So we had a lunch right after our meeting. And so me and the rest of the consultants were sitting around the table, and a man who was newly hired turned to the other males and he says, "Hey, you guys, I got step 9 on the salary scale." And he was so happy. And I can remember that like it was yesterday because it felt like a gut punch to my stomach. And I just remember being so stunned and thinking, he didn't really just say that, did he? And then he repeated it and he got high fives. And I remember one of them turned to me and they said, "Aileen, are you still climbing steps?" And that question was significant because when I came to the county office, I was introduced to a salary scale that started at 1 and ended at 10. Well, I had started at 1. I falsely assumed that everyone started at 1. My colleague who had just gotten hired and signed his contract was familiar to me. We had worked on other projects together. So I knew that he didn't have a master's degree and I had one and was finishing a second. I knew that I had started teaching earlier than he did. And I knew that his background was mostly in elementary education, where I had degrees in math education and I taught high school math. And so I was just a little confused. I thought really it must be a mistake. It just must be a mistake. Well, when I went to the HR, I found out that what they used to set my salary was my previous salary. So the history of my salary was being perpetuated as I came to this new job. It was based on whatever I got paid last. I try to be reasonable. I try to say, well, I was from Arizona, the cost of living, try to, give them logical reasons why that didn't seem fair. But I was told this line, which is a very dangerous line, and I couldn't believe it was used to justify. But she told me that's the way we've always done it. Well, my employer, like Aileen Black's, years and years ago, they didn't want to see the disparity as a sign of a system that was broken, right? But instead, they defended their position for 8 long years, navigating the courts through petitions for dismissal, threats to countersue me, appeals, and the hiring of one of the top law firms in the world. It was a case that became dangerous because if I won, the case law that was set would require so many employers to do right. And I learned that it was so important for laws to be updated, to be revisited, for us to do edits and to clarify things. Because if we don't, unfortunately, a lot of employers, they go by not the intent of the law, but the letter of the law. And if you go only by the letter, then you're really trying to find out how you can get away with some things, especially if it has a bottom line to go with it. And throughout those steps was where I found AAUW and the work that they had done, the equal rights advocates and the work that they're doing. And I was approached to share my story at the California legislature for that specific loophole to be closed, but also to have an action that reflected the need for the Equal Pay Act to be revisited, but Congress was not acting on that. So states started acting in response to that. And the Fair Pay Act in 2015 was signed by our governor. And I was able to go to the legislature the year that was in session and share my story, because a lot of the excuses that are given always turn back on how it's the woman's fault. So we don't study the right things. So how can we expect to make more than men, right? We become mothers. We stay out of work. So all of these things that were given as excuses, my story kind of closed those stories. Like, well, here's a woman who did study STEM. So that's supposed to be a lucrative field. She has advanced degrees. So what's the excuse now? It was so daunting to go there in front of legislators and share my story in the 2 or 3 minutes that they give you. But it really changed me forever because it really made me civically engaged. And the responsibility that each of us has to hold our representatives accountable. So through all of that journey and through all of that time, there was so much that me, my children, my family went through, good and bad, the ups and downs. When we went to the Ninth Circuit, we initially lost in front of the 3 justices. And a petition was signed by AAUW and over 25 advocates around the country to have the Ninth Circuit rehear my case in front of 11 justices instead. And that was granted, and only very few percentage of cases get reheard. When it was reheard, the decision was overturned unanimously. And I was able to preserve that because once it was appealed to the Supreme Court declined to take the case. So on July 2nd, 2020, the Supreme Court declined to hear a challenge to the Ninth Circuit's unanimous decision in my favor. And so the Ninth Circuit's February opinion stands firm for all the states in the Ninth Circuit, that this is now case law, that within the Ninth Circuit, using prior salary cannot justify a wage differential between employees. And that was a gray area that had never been contested to that length to that height of a court before. Had the Supreme Court taken the case and agreed with it, it would be a national thing. But we still have circuits within our country that don't agree with that decision, and so there still is work to do in that case. My dream one day is that the Equal Pay Act will be revisited, updated, and that the practice of paying women less simply because turns out they are women, that employers won't be able to escape that anymore. I think this is a picture from the the Harper's Bazaar magazine did a story. My daughter joined me that day, and this picture was taken kind of impromptu by the photographer, but they ended up loving it so much. It really captures the reason that I could last 8 years, the reason that I did it in the beginning. When I came home and I knew that the county office was not going to change their decision, I think, like most of us, we think about, well, how can I fix this? If they're not going to do anything, I can go find another job. It was really hard to go back to work with that knowledge in my head because I just didn't feel valued. I just didn't feel appreciated. And it really tore me inside that was the decision from an organization that's supposed to be about education, uplifting people, and using education as such a powerful tool that it is. When I came home one day from work and going through all of that thinking and processing, my children ran to the door like they always did, gave me a hug, happy that I was home. And I realized something in that moment that lasted with me all the way till today. That whatever I accepted, whatever I endured, whatever I allowed to happen to me, I thereby was passing that same world, work environment to my children. That it could never change if I didn't stand up for myself. So there's a quote that says, when a woman stands up for herself, without even knowing it, she stands up for others also. If this was happening to my child and they were being treated that way, I would be livid. Of course, we're so ready to jump for the social justice and equity and equality for our children. But it is time, and well past time, for us to embrace that for ourselves, knowing that the world we pass to them is the world that we've changed or molded or accepted in part, that behavior. And that has been something that has just inspired me. What seemed like a neutral policy at the county office made the wrong assumption. It made an assumption that we all come from equal paths, equal histories, equal standing. We know that that's not true. And if you're a person of color, that's especially not true. And if you're a woman of color, then you have that intersectionality that makes it doubly wrong for you. October 29th was Latina Equal Pay Day. I don't know what it is now, but I know it fluctuates there as a day that on average, a Latina has to work into the next year to make on average the same as a white man made the previous year. We still have a lot of work to do, a lot of good trouble to get into. And so I'm just grateful for the people who've been in my life, who've helped me along this journey, because like I said, these stories of these women are just elevated because it doesn't just take one of us, it takes us all working together. And even when we lose, like Lily Ledbetter did, we actually still win. Because if she had not gotten through her case and the law had not been passed, I would have never had that same opportunity. The case law would have never happened. And so it's just so important that we continue to stand together, that we continue to think about the work that we can do. And it's scary because when we get complacent, we're seeing that some of our rights get taken away. And so I'm inspired by just having this opportunity to speak to you today. I know we're going to take questions, but I just want to again tell you thank you for the time that you're willing to share and hear my story. And yeah, so thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Aileen. Right now, we're open for questions in the chat. And thus far, I think people are thinking. There aren't questions. What was the hardest part, Aileen, in your whole multi-year stuff?
Well, the hardest part was that I had moved my family from Phoenix to Fresno for the job. I was the only breadwinner. So there was a lot of risk. I mean, I was suing my employer and I didn't know what would happen. Like when the first court we went to was for summary judgment. So that meant like they were asking for it to be dismissed. But they weren't just asking that. They were saying, we're going to ask this to be dismissed, and then you're going to owe us all these legal fees for making all this trouble you're making for us. And I was scared. So it was just the up and downs. Like every time there was another hearing, I remember being in the first hearing and seeing those three justices ask questions and then getting the notice that they didn't agree. They said that that was fine for them to use prior pay. And that was so devastating. I think every time you come to that crossroads, you have to ask yourself if you're still willing to go forward. And that's so hard. And yeah, I'm just grateful for the courage that it took to get over those places, because it was worth it. It really was.
Some of the LAF cases that are settled have I'm trying to think of the word, where they're not allowed to talk about what they received.
Mm-hmm.
There's in your case, was that the same? And whether it was or not, how did the school district fight paying you back?
So we were in the pandemic when the last settlement conference happened. So there's a lot of things that were going on that time in my family personally, but also in the world. There was no idea of when there would be a case or a trial. So that would be it. If we didn't settle, it would have gone to trial for a jury to decide the settlement. And there was no way to know when or if that would happen. Like we were in a pandemic. I agreed to not talk about the amount as long as I still had my voice and my story. I've told my close friends that I have a book to write someday. And I didn't want anyone to take that away from me and say that I couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't have my story. I lived it. In some of the previous settlement conferences, what was hard is that, we go to those and it had been so many years. And I remember the lawyer on the other side saying, this is the amount we want to give you to make you whole. My nature is to be quiet, to not be confrontational. That's kind of who I am, who I usually am. But I was so like prickled by that statement because I was like, there's no way. So I spoke up and I said, you know what? There's no way you could make me whole again, ever. No amount of money can bring back all of those years and all of that stress and burden that I had to carry for so long. You can't make me whole again. So let's not even use that word. I was able to get, the past pay, the gap, but it was still an environment that still hadn't accepted a way to just make things right. Because even in their hypothetical, I should have been at step 6 or something. Like they still weren't making me equal to the man who got 9 in their hypothetical narrative and declaration and papers. So it was just a difficult process to go through overall. I think I heard about the US soccer team and how they had to fight for pay equality. I saw their documentary and I just resonated with so much of the excuses that were given to them. I heard them. I heard those same excuses and the ways that they were trying to make things right. It's just abhorrent, and it really is just indicative of just the change that needs to happen.
Definitely. We have a comment from Norma Williamson, who says, as a retired public school teacher of Los Angeles County Office of Education, I wonder if all county offices of education have similar pay scale levels. Wonderful presentation, so articulate. Bravo. So is this pay scale similar, do you know, in other school districts?
Well, because the California Fair Pay Act was signed in 2015, the county office changed their policy and changed their pay scale. And my case didn't do that. The advocacy of getting that law done did that. Now, yes, I did go testify for that, but that's just a powerful way that change happened. So for the last 6 months that I worked for the county office, I got paid equally to my male counterparts. So that change that happened across the board. I don't see any county office using prior salary anymore. No one should be using it in California anymore. I think there was another law that was passed that said you can't even ask for a person's salary history. So those things that seem small were powerful ways that we gave the woman back her power. I mean, if you stayed out of work because you had a child, you didn't have to be penalized like for being a mom. So the Fair Pay Act allowed for us to make sure we can talk about our salaries with other people who are working around us and not be retaliated against. We can ask the HR if we even suspect someone's getting paid more than us, we can ask them to check on that and give us the numbers. And we can hold our salary history to ourselves. The employer can't ask for that. So yeah, I don't think any county office or school will be using prior salary anymore. They only use education and experience.
Well, hopefully, all places, at least in California, are following the law. And thank you for your advocacy in getting it done so that they don't ask about prior salary and they don't base salary upon prior salary. Marianne Donahue is asking, what was the response of your fellow workers to your lawsuit?
Oh, wow. So it was pretty quiet until Maria Shriver came to my house and she interviewed me for the Dateline News. There was a whole story around her. She had done a very thorough report about women on the brink. So the economic crisis that women were facing. She had called a few advocates in California and they recommended her highlighting my story. So she came to my house, which was surreal. I can't believe it still happened. And she interviewed me, and it was just after we had gotten permission to file a lawsuit because I was suing a government agency, we had to get permission to file the lawsuit in the federal courts. So when that went on the news, it was very public then. I mean, how could it not be? Mostly I got quiet, very, very quiet, like, support. I did have some people who were very unhappy with me doing that. That in part was my direct supervisor, his supervisor, of course, the superintendent, all the administration was not happy with me. So, and then there was other women there who recognized that they weren't being treated well either, but they wanted a future at the county office and didn't want to risk it. And so there was never going to be any like class action suit, even though I thought that there could have been, because it takes, a great risk. And I don't hold anything against them. Everyone has to make that decision for themselves. But it was difficult. It was being the elephant in the room at every curriculum department meeting and knowing that you were. And that was hard. That was hard.
And that's so common with not only the AAUW LAF litigants, but any litigants who are pursuing justice. And with the Legal Advocacy Fund, that you started your case in 2012 when you had an attorney and you had started the legal process and you had gotten, the decision that kind of not in your favor. And then you came to LAF in 2015. So this is basically a question from Kirsten, so that in terms of you already had your attorney, one of the things that for people to know is that the LAF does not pay for an attorney. LAF pays for like about everything else, the press conferences, the
Travel.
the travel, but the expert witnesses, even in terms of there's usually a psychiatrist involved one way or another to testify that the litigant is sane, because the companies or institutions will try whatever way they can to make the litigant look crazy. So how was your journey with the Legal Advocacy Fund?
So
How did we support you?
So right after, so in the waiting time and right after I had gotten my lawyer, it was Dan Siegel in San Francisco, and they tried first to write a letter. They tried first to do other things instead of just filing a lawsuit. So in getting the permission, it was actually Equal Pay Day, and I went to Fresno State because AAUW had a table down there. And stopped by at my lunchtime and talked to these amazing women and learned like that's what you do, like that's what AUW does, like they fight for the equal rights of women and for equity. And so I'd made great connections there, and at the time there was a local chapter and I joined. So it was after the summary judgment where AUW contacted me to be supported by the LAF Fund, Legal Advocacy Fund, and they helped me with the 2 Ninth Circuit travel. So, and there was a lot of space in between, but the Ninth Circuit traveling to San Francisco and all that entailed, any like dockets that needed to be submitted and paperwork around that, filing costs. And then of course we appealed, and there was, a year in between that, and then we had another case. But it wasn't just like, here's money to reimburse you. I mean, there was an AAUW group there with signs and just to support to have people sit with you when you're in the court, because there's nothing that I was going to say in front of the justices. The judges, I mean the lawyers are doing everything. There wasn't ever a call for me to be a witness in those cases, but they're talking about my life, like they're talking about me, and so I got to go and be there and not have to worry about all of that travel and expense. So yeah, that's mostly what it was. When we won the en banc, which is the appeal, then it was just a waiting process to see whether or not the Supreme Court would take the case, and so it didn't happen. But yeah, I don't know how they heard about my story, but I know when they did, like it was highlighted. There was an editor who was doing different pages for the website, and she had contacted me, and so maybe just through highlighting my story and what was going on, that's kind of where it got across different people's eyes. I did get to go to there was a Latina equity summit in Washington, D.C., and I got to be the keynote speaker there at that time. And then I got to go to the AAUW office in Washington and briefly speak to some of the students that were being supported through their dissertations, and got to talk to them and meet several people there at the office. So yeah, it's been a wonderful journey and collaboration.
And certainly that AAUW provide so much more than financial support with the emotional support. And I think they went to, what was it, San Francisco, and had all of those signs in the courthouse and people gathering together.
Yes, yes.
Okay. We have a question from Roseanne Child, who is the former, I think it's LAF VP former legal VP for the state of California. How are you doing now? Do you feel that you are being paid equally and fairly now? So how are you doing first?
We're doing much better now. So I told you, like, the last 6 months I was paid equally, and I was working as part of my contract as a liaison for the AIM Center. In that work, they offered me a full-time position, and I took it. I wish that was like the whole beautiful story, but the reality was I encountered some things that mirrored a lot of things I had just experienced. And they had a new pay policy and they put it in the handbook, and we had a meeting. And I went to the meeting and I asked questions, and my questions were not appreciated. So some of the labels that women get are angry. And so I was called to HR, and that was familiar for me because I'd been there before, but I'd never been there before so supported and knowledgeable than ever. So what do? I call my friend, who's now my friend, who's the California Employment Associate Director in Sacramento, because I met her when I was going up there and testifying. And I said, this is what's going on. What should I do? How do I protect myself? And she said, when you go in that meeting, take someone with you. And when you go to the door and they say, who is this? Just say, this is person who's going to take notes for me. And I tell you, that saved me from being fired that day. I went in there and they said, Aileen, why are you so angry? You're not happy to be here. And I said, I'm not angry. I just asked questions. You said to read the handbook and come with questions. And they said, well, you should have told us that in private. And I was like, well, I didn't know my questions were going to be, so, and it just went on. And every time I felt like they got upset, and they had known my history. Like, they knew that I, yes, just sued someone for equal pay, and I was still in that lawsuit at the time. They said, well, why didn't you tell us, like, that this was wrong or whatever, or you had questions about it? And they said, why didn't you ask me? If you know who I am and you know my history, why didn't you ask me? And their policy was going to give people raises based on the education degrees that you acquired while working there. which sounds great. And I told him, it sounds great. I said, but if you come with all of your education degrees already, you're not giving any stipends to people who are coming. So then you're going to have an unequal space here because people who are earning degrees while working here can surpass people who already had degrees before they came. So that's where it can, like, it doesn't work. And so, short story is that that director ended up getting asked to leave by the board. And we went through a whole restructuring system. And whatever like blessing or karma came out from that is that I was asked to be the associate director. In purpose in my heart that I would be the boss that I needed and see and would have wanted during those times that I needed support, that I needed positive culture, that I needed just to be human-centered. And so I'm very grateful for the directors that I work with. There's 2 others that I work with, and we are the leadership team of the Ames Center. And we are, you know, promoting a culture that's just so much different and so much better. And pay equity is at the top of the list. And both of those men, they acknowledge my journey, and they not only acknowledge it, but they respect me for having that journey, and have highlighted the facts that, you know, when I have speaking engagements or anything that happens, they're quick to just ask me my opinion and just yeah, it's just totally different. So I'm just so grateful that I can be part of a leadership team that now is equitable. And so that's why I tell women, I say, you know, one day you're going to be the boss. So let's work hard so that we're the bosses that we needed when we weren't treated fairly. So yeah, so I'm grateful for that.
Aileen, you are amazing. We're so grateful that you're part of us and you use your voice to stand for all women.
Mhm.
This is from Nancy Shoemaker. Thank you for reminding me that LAF and hearing from plaintiffs was the original glue that cemented my commitment to AAUW. And you are on our website. People can look at the past cases, and we did include the link to the website on our invitation. So this is another one from Roseanne, and I heartily agree. Thank you for being your authentic self. You are amazing.
Thank you. Thank you for your support and for the work we do together, because only standing together can make a difference.
Mhm.
And there's
Love
ever a
that.
time we needed to stand together, it's now.
Okay. And there are current cases that are still and there will be future cases, and any support that any of our members can give financially or emotionally is very much welcome. It looks like we've come to the end of the questions. Any more questions, anybody? Any additional thoughts or comments,
I
Aileen?
have a question for you, Aileen.
Oh.
This is Randa. And it was getting to be over, so I decided to just cut in and ask you this. I understand that the president just signed a executive order having to do with this issue. Are you familiar with the issue that I'm talking about? The recent executive order. I thought it was to make it illegal to ever ask what prior salaries were, and therefore it would be national, but I'm not sure that I'm right.
I haven't heard that. I know that there's a Paycheck Fairness Act that they've tried to get to be voted on the floor, but has never made it to the Congress to be voted on. So I'm not sure if an executive order has been signed. That would be wonderful.
We have Kirsten saying, thank you so much, Aileen. You and the presentation are such an inspiration. And Judy Krogstad has said, Aileen, you are my superhero. I definitely support that. You are my superhero. Elaine, you said you had a question?
I have a comment, and again, a major kudos to you and thank you so much. I love the part where you talked about your non-confrontational nature, because I think that many of us feel that way. We don't necessarily love confrontation, and still it's so important that we learn how to appropriately do it. And your example and mentoring is really significant for all of us. We can't thank you enough for being here today. And we also would like to thank everybody who joined today, who made their questions and made the conversation meaningful to each of us. And we would like to also encourage anyone that is not a member to think about becoming a member of the online branch, because we have such a vibrant group of interested people, and we all benefit so much from each other. As you said, working together and promoting the culture of change and support is something that is near and dear to all of our hearts. And so we are most appreciative to you, to Toby, to Randa, and to everyone who participated today. Thank you.
Yes.
Well, lots of things are coming in terms of thank you, Aileen. I'm very impressed by your courage and journey. That was from Alice L. And from Nancy Shoemaker, thank you for your ongoing effort.